The Kingdom of Aethelgard was not built on stone. It was built on a lie. To the world, it was a shimmering beacon of prosperity, a city of white marble and gold spires that seemed to touch the very clouds. But beneath the polished surface, in the labyrinthine servant tunnels that ran like veins through the palace, lived the unseen. My name is Elara, and for 15 years, my world has been exactly 3 feet wide. The width of the corridors I scrub every single morning before the sun dares to rise. In Aethelgard, there is a hierarchy of blood. The gilded are those born into the lineage of King Valerius, a man whose smile is as sharp as a guillotine. Then there are the dustborn, the servants, the cleaners, the shadows. I am the lowest of them all. I am the maid assigned to the great library of ancestors, a place so vast and lonely that even the spiders seem to die of boredom. But I'm not just a maid. Every time I touch the spine of a book or polish the silver busts of the ancient kings, I feel a strange electric hum in my fingertips. My mother, before she was taken by the great fever 5 years ago, used to whisper to me in the dark of our cramped cellar. "Elara, the stones of this palace remember the truth," she would say, her voice a fragile thread. "They remember the night the dragons fell and the wolves took the throne. You are the heartbeat of those stones. Never let them see you bleed, for your blood is the colour of fire." Today was the day of the solstice engagement. Princess Seraphina, the king's only daughter and a woman whose cruelty was as legendary as her beauty, was to be betrothed to the Duke of the Iron Isles. The palace was a chaotic hive of activity. Thousands of lilies were being imported, their scent so cloying it felt like breathing perfume. I was summoned to the royal chambers. This was unusual. Library maids were rarely allowed into the gilded wing. As I walked, my head bowed low, I caught my reflection in a polished suit of armour. I didn't recognize myself. My skin was pale from years of living in windowless halls, my hair a dull brown from the lye soap. But my eyes, they were a piercing, haunting violet, the colour of the old royalty. "You, the girl with the dull face, move faster." The voice belonged to Madame Vora, the head housekeeper. She was a woman who enjoyed the sound of a whip more than music. She shoved a tray of diamond-encrusted jewellery into my hands. "The princess needs her invisible to hold the mirror. Go, and if you speak, I'll have your tongue for breakfast." I entered the princess's suite. It was a cathedral of vanity. Princess Seraphina sat before a vanity made of solid ivory, her golden hair being braided by 4 other maids. She looked at me through the mirror with a sneer that could wither a rose. "You're late," she snapped. "Hold the mirror, higher. I want to see how the moonlight catches the necklace." For 3 hours, I stood as still as a statue. My arms ached, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't move. I had learned to dissociate, to go into a trance where I was no longer Elara the maid, but a silent observer of history. As Seraphina leaned forward to adjust her corset, she accidentally knocked a vial of expensive rose oil. It shattered, splashing onto my shoulder and soaking through my thin, threadbare tunic. The fabric became translucent. "Look at you, you clumsy rat!" Seraphina screamed, standing up and spinning around to slap me. But as her hand swung, it stopped mid-air. Her eyes widened, fixating on my left shoulder. The rose oil had made the skin visible, and beneath the surface, a birthmark began to glow with a faint amber light. It was the shape of a dragon curled around a sun, the dragon's crest. The room went deathly silent. The other maids gasped, dropping the brushes. That's impossible," Seraphina whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with murderous rage. "That mark was wiped from the earth 20 years ago. My father burned every child who bore it. Before I could pull my tunic back, the heavy oak doors burst open. King Valerius walked in, flanked by his iron guard. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a predator. "What is this commotion?" he demanded. Seraphina pointed a trembling finger at me. "Father, the maid. She bears the crest, the Vanderbilt mark." Valerius moved faster than a man of his age should. He gripped my jaw, forcing my head up. His hands smelled of expensive tobacco and old blood. He looked at the mark on my shoulder, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "So, the legend was true," he hissed. "The Queen did hide the spark in the soot. You've been under my roof all this time, scrubbing my floors, eating my scraps, while your blood calls for my head." "My blood calls for justice, not just a head," I said. It was the first time I had spoken in the royal presence. My voice was surprisingly steady, echoing the roar of the ancestors I had spent years reading about. Valerius laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Justice is for the living. You are already a ghost, Elara. Guards, take her to the oubliette of silence, and find the woman who raised her. If she's dead, dig her up and burn the remains. I want every trace of this lineage erased by midnight." I was dragged through the palace, but not through the beautiful halls. They took me down the dead man's staircase, a spiral of damp stone that led to the foundations of the castle. The oubliette was a hole in the ground, barely large enough to stand in, located beneath the sewer lines. As they threw me in, the head knight, Sir Calin, a man with a scarred face and eyes that seemed to hold a deep grief, paused. He looked at me for a second longer than necessary. "The light in the dark," he whispered, so low the other guards couldn't hear. Then he slammed the iron grate shut. I sat in the pitch black, the sound of dripping water the only company. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I knew who I was. I wasn't Elara the maid. I was Elara Vanderbilt, the rightful queen of Aethelgard. Hours passed. I began to hum an old melody my mother taught me. Suddenly, a stone in the wall vibrated. A small, hidden latch clicked. "The library isn't the only place with secrets, little dragon," a voice whispered from behind the wall. It was Sir Calin. He had opened a secret passage used by the old kings for escape. He handed me a bundle, a sharp obsidian dagger, and a small, leather-bound diary. "This belonged to your father," Calin said. "He knew Valerius would betray him. He left a fail-safe inside the palace's heart, the Great Clock Tower. If you can reach it before the execution at dawn, you can trigger the palace purge. It will lock every door, reveal every hidden record, and broadcast the king's crimes to the city via the steam sirens." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Calin knelt in the mud of the tunnel. "Because I didn't just guard your father. I loved him, and I have spent 20 years waiting for the true heir to wake up. Now go. The tunnels lead to the clock tower, but beware. The princess has sent her hounds into the vents to find you." I took the dagger. The cold weight of the obsidian felt right in my hand. The maid was gone. The queen was rising. The tunnels Sir Calin had pointed me toward were not meant for human travel. They were the gutters of the palace, a steaming, claustrophobic network of brass pipes and hissing valves that powered the kingdom's opulent displays of wealth. While the royals enjoyed hot baths and heated floors above, the air down here was thick with the smell of sulphur and ancient grease. I crawled through the narrow vents, my lungs burning. Every few minutes, a blast of steam would erupt from a relief valve, threatening to scald me alive. But my military-like discipline, born from 15 years of never being allowed to rest, kept my heart steady. I reached a junction where 4 massive brass pipes met. This was the central hydration hub. I remembered this from an old schematic I had seen while dusting the forbidden archives. This hub controlled the flow of the liquid gold, a specialized glowing fuel that powered the palace's majestic clock tower. If I could reach the tower, I could activate the oracle gears. These were ancient mechanical scrolls that recorded every decree, every whisper, and every crime committed within the palace walls since its foundation. Valerius had tried to lock them, but Kaelin's diary held the Vanderbilt harmonic, a musical sequence that only my voice, carrying the royal resonance, could trigger. Suddenly, the rhythmic thudding of the steam pistons was interrupted by a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up, the scratching of claws against metal. Princess Seraphina's hounds weren't dogs. They were elite, mask-wearing assassins, trained to move through the palace's secret spaces like spiders. I saw the glow of their red-lensed goggles in the darkness behind me. There were 3 of them. "The little bird thinks she can fly," one of them hissed, his voice distorted by a brass respirator. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I waited until the first assassin lunged, his silver katar blade flashing in the dim light. I dropped flat, letting the blade whistle over my head and strike a high-pressure steam pipe. Hiss! A jet of boiling steam blasted directly into the assassin's face. He let out a muffled shriek as he tumbled into the darkness of the lower pits. The other 2 hesitated. I used that second to pull the obsidian dagger. I wasn't just a maid. I was a girl who had spent a decade watching the guards train from the library window, memorizing their footwork, their flaws, and their arrogance. I didn't fight them with strength. I fought them with the palace itself. I yanked a manual override lever above me. A massive iron grate, meant for filtering debris, slammed down between me and the remaining hounds. They snarled, hacking at the bars with their blades, but I was already gone, disappearing into the vertical shaft of the clock tower. The climb up the clock tower was a vertical nightmare. I had to jump between moving gears the size of houses. Each tooth of the gear was sharp enough to bisect a man. As I climbed higher, the air became colder, and the sound of the ticking grew deafening, a heartbeat of stone and steel. Finally, I reached the apex chamber. In the center of the room sat the oracle engine. It was a masterpiece of ancient engineering, a spherical birdcage of rotating gold rings and glass cylinders. Inside the cylinders were thousands of tiny, etched crystal needles, the memory pins of Aethelgard. I approached the pedestal. My hands were shaking, covered in grease and soot. I looked at my mother's diary. The code wasn't a series of numbers. It was a song. A lullaby she used to sing to me in the cellar. I began to hum. At first, my voice was thin and cracked. But as I touched the glass of the engine, the dragon's crest on my shoulder began to pulse with a blinding amber light. My voice grew stronger, filling the chamber, vibrating against the brass. The sun will set on the mountain of gold. The dragon wakes as the truth is told. The oracle engine groaned. The gold rings began to spin with impossible speed. The crystal needles aligned, and suddenly, the great clock's face, which looked out over the entire city of Aethelgard, began to change. Instead of showing the time, the clock became a massive projector. Down in the city square, thousands of people were gathered for the solstice celebration. They looked up in shock as the face of the clock tower projected a series of images. King Valerius poisoning the late queen's wine. Valerius signing the order to burn the Vanderbilt nurseries. Valerius's secret ledgers showing he had sold the kingdom's grain reserves to foreign enemies. Inside the palace, the steam sirens, massive brass horns used for emergency warnings, began to blast my mother's lullaby, amplified to a roar that shook the very foundations of the city. "No! Shut it down! Break the gears!" I heard Valerius's voice screaming from the balcony below. The palace was in total lockdown. The oracle engine had triggered the Aegis protocol, Every door was sealed with a magnetic lock. The king was trapped in his own golden cage, and his people were finally seeing the monster behind the crown. But the fight wasn't over. The ceiling of the clock tower shattered as a grappling hook tore through the glass. Princess Seraphina, draped in her engagement silk but wielding a ceremonial rapier, dropped into the chamber. "You've ruined my wedding, you filthy peasant," she hissed, her eyes wild with madness. "But you won't live to see the coronation." She lunged, the tip of her rapier aimed directly at my heart. I raised the obsidian dagger, the amber glow of my heritage illuminating the room. "The wedding is over, Seraphina," I said, my voice echoing with the power of 1,000 ancestors. "It's time for the funeral of your father's lies." The apex chamber of the clock tower was now a storm of light and sound. The oracle engine continued to project the king's sins onto the clouds above the city, while the steam sirens shrieked like dying giants. Princess Seraphina's rapier moved like a silver snake. She had been trained by the finest fencing masters in the world, her movements fluid and deadly. I, however, had been trained by the invisible life of a maid. I knew how to balance on narrow ledges, how to move without making a sound, and how to endure pain that would make a noble faint. "You are nothing but a ghost in a stolen dress," Seraphina screamed, her blade grazing my cheek. "Even if you expose us, the people will never follow a girl who smells of lie and soot." "The people won't follow me because of my scent, Seraphina," I countered, parrying her strike with the obsidian dagger. The impact sent vibrations up my arm. "They will follow me because I am the only one in this palace who knows what it's like to be one of them." I kicked a heavy brass lever, releasing a burst of pressurized air. The distraction worked. As she blinked against the gust, I swept her legs out from under her. She fell hard against the rotating glass cylinders of the engine. I held the obsidian blade to her throat. Her golden crown had fallen off, rolling away into the gears. "Your father's empire was built on the bodies of my family. It ends tonight." Suddenly, the floor of the chamber groaned. The massive central lift, the one used only by the king, rose into the room. King Valerius stepped out, but he was no longer the composed monarch. He looked like a cornered animal. He held a high-powered steam rifle, its barrel glowing red. "Step away from my daughter, Vanderbilt," Valerius growled. "I'll burn this entire tower to the ground before I let you take that seat." "The tower is already burning, Valerius," I said, pointing to the windows. Down in the streets, the citizens of Aethelgard were no longer celebrating. They were carrying torches. They had seen the truth on the clock face. The palace gates were being rammed by the very people who had once cheered for him. Valerius looked out at his crumbling kingdom, his hand trembling on the trigger. "Then we all die together." Before he could fire, the shadows behind him shifted. Sir Caelan, the head knight, emerged from the darkness. His sword was drawn, but it wasn't pointed at me. With one swift, heavy blow, he struck the barrel of the steam rifle, sending the shot wide. The blast hit the main cooling pipe of the tower. Boom! The entire clock tower shuddered. The gears began to grind against each other, throwing sparks like fireworks. The Aegis protocol was failing. The palace was self-destructing to prevent the secret technology from falling into the wrong hands. "Go, Elara!" Caelan shouted, pinning Valerius against the wall as the king struggled. "The lift is the only way out. The oracle engine is going to explode." I looked at the engine. It was still projecting, now showing a final image. My father's face, smiling, holding a young girl. My mother had saved this memory for me. Seraphina was sobbing on the floor, her pride shattered. Valerius was screaming for his guards, but they had already fled. I had a choice. I could leave them here to be consumed by the flames of their own making, or I could be the queen my father wanted me to be. I grabbed Seraphina by the arm and dragged her toward the lift. I looked at Kaelin. I won't leave you, Kaelin. Come with us. My duty ended 20 years ago, my queen, Kaelin said, a sad smile touching his scarred lips. Tonight, I finally go to see your father. He kicked the lift lever, sending us plunging downward, just as the apex chamber erupted in a massive explosion of brass and glass. The great clock shattered, its giant hands falling into the palace gardens like broken wings. I emerged from the palace ruins into the cool morning air. The sun was rising over Aethelgard, but the light was different now. The gilded palace was a blackened shell, and the invisible people were the ones standing in the ruins. The crowd went silent as I walked out, still wearing my torn, soot-stained maid's tunic, carrying the obsidian dagger and the royal diary. Seraphina walked behind me, her head bowed in shame. I climbed onto the pedestal where my father's statue once stood. I didn't need a crown. The dragon's crest on my shoulder was glowing so brightly it could be seen by everyone in the square. Aethelgard, I cried out, my voice carrying across the silence. The age of lies is over. We will not rebuild the walls that kept us apart. We will build a bridge for those who have been in the dark. The people didn't cheer immediately. There was a long, heavy silence. Then a single old woman, one of the kitchen staff I had worked with for years, stepped forward and knelt in the mud. Then another. Then a blacksmith. Then a soldier. "Long live Queen Elara!" the cry began, growing until it shook the very earth. I looked at the charred remains of the library, where I had spent 15 years dusting the past. I realized I wasn't there to preserve history anymore. I was there to write it. The palace of lies had fallen. The kingdom of truth was just beginning.